these vehicles that they're launching today should have been launched 3 or 4 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago when the ID3, the ID4 were launched, because these vehicles are kind of sort of competitive today, but they would have been pretty competitive 3 or 4 years ago. So that's the lag that we're seeing from the standpoint of the Chinese players continue to exponentially increase features and innovation, while the legacy automakers still seem to be very linear, right? Every 12, 14 months, we're going to improve. Every 12 and 14 months, we're going to improve. And that's just the bridge is the partnerships that help them accelerate adding some features. But at the end of the day, unless they can get out in front of the innovation cycle, it's just going to be chasing, they're a dog chasing its tail, in my opinion. Welcome to China EVs and More. Every week, my co-host Lei Xing and I will break down the most important developments shaping the global EV, AV, and mobility sectors, and offer an unfiltered, on-the-ground perspective informed by decades of experience and trusted relationships across China and around the world. I'm Tu Li, Managing Director at Sino Insights, a global management consultancy that focuses on innovation in the mobility and transportation spaces. Some topics come from my Sino Insights newsletter. For deeper analysis delivered directly to your inbox, subscribe at sinoautoinsights.substack.com. Nothing discussed on this show should be considered investment advice, so please do your own research. If you value what we do, please like, subscribe, and share with your network. It helps us continue delivering insight that keeps you ahead of this fast-moving industry. Shenzhen Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
I'm actually getting used to this new interface on Riverside. But anyways, yes, coming to you live from Shenzhen. And this is your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, episode 257, the last episode where I'll be in China and coming to you live from Shenzhen. Every time coming to Shenzhen is a shock. And we've been to Shenzhen quite a few times, let alone the people that have not been here or are visiting for the first time. Shout out to Taylor Ogan, a friend of the show, who took me to visit the latest and the greatest in the Shenzhen Bay Talent Park. They just opened a new kind of a underground shopping mall. The latest
What up, Taylor?
AI. It's unfathomable, pun intended, how advanced things are, the stuff that you see here. It's like a little kid on Christmas Day. And I'm in Shenzhen doing a presentation for HKU Business School Executive Program tomorrow. There's a program on the Chinese EV transition. So I'm still preparing for that after this. But news of the week is GM finally getting that extension of the GM China joint venture. It's been a long time coming, carries a lot of significance. Mary Barra wasn't at the event in Shanghai. She gave a video address, but it's something that for a while we've been wondering whether that's going to be signed at all. And now it's been extended 20 years. It's a new day.
I think we all kind of knew it was going to be signed. I think there's a lot of posturing going on both sides.
So you're like, nah.
Well,
this is going nowhere.
If I'm SAIC, I'm pretty worried about my Volkswagen partner because they're still bleeding. GM has really turned the corner, and it looks like their sales have settled, growing a little bit on the Buick and Cadillac side, and their products seem to be resonating a little bit better than the Volkswagen Group's VW brand vehicles in China. So a little bit.
Yeah. But from my own perspective of how this news is important to the industry, but also I think important to me because I don't know where you were in 1997, but 3 things from that year I remember the most. 1 is Jordan getting his second of 3 consecutive championships. 2, Tiger Woods winning his first Masters. And number 3, the SAIC-GM officially established in June 1997. I was a sophomore in college. And that's about the time I kind of started, not covering, but the early days of when my dad started China Auto Review, I kind of started looking at the Chinese auto industry, and it's been almost 30 years. So this joint venture carries a bit of begin to have feelings for it. And then these people, like the GM China people, many of them I kept in touch over the years. They just want to be relevant again, I guess the way to put it. And the way to do it is to not treat this no longer as a SAIC-GM joint venture, but what I say will be just another smart EV startup in China, competing with the other smart EV startups. I think that's the mentality that they will have to carry forward to be relevant. And I think signing it for 20 years is kind of diplomatically speaking, it shows confidence, it shows commitment, but whether it'll survive the next 20 years, I don't know. I'm not sure. But what's on paper is, hey, we've extended this for 20 years. Others have only extended for 10 years. If you think about the SAIC Volkswagen as kind of the pioneer in the joint venture space, SAIC-GM holds special significance in the Chinese market because of the way they started out with the Buick Sail, the 100,000 RMB family sedan, the OG, the Buick GLA. They are the pioneers of many segments in the Chinese market. That's why I think, for me, look at this industry for so long. Some of these joint ventures, I really want them to get their mojo back and to be relevant. And I hope there will be some JVs left to fight in this competitive landscape. Not all will survive, but that's where we are today. Just some of my thoughts.
I was, I think, a junior or senior in college, and I had just, late 97, I just accepted a full-time role at General Motors.
There we go.
How I knew about Shanghai General Motors is through my brother, who you've met, who was flying back and forth as a sourcing guy training the local sourcing team. And he was on and off, in and out of China for the good part of 2.5, 3 years. And he got to sign his name on the first Shanghai Buick. I think it was like a Regal or one of those.
Well, the first one is the Buick Century.
Yes, the Century. So it was white. And he signed his name along with, who was the guy at the time? The CEO, he had the Widow's Peak and the glasses. I forget his name. But anyways, so my brother was part of that team that autographed the first Century off the line. So I've known about it. Didn't really have that much exposure, obviously, to China. Still in college, so was partying in bed, was really just worried about finding a job. Long story short, I had gotten an offer from Toyota in California, in Torrance. And this GM thing came late. I was ready to take the Toyota job, get this job offer because my sister was working at GM. She put my resume in. And after an afternoon of interviews, I get an offer. And then I told my mom. And she said, I prayed that you would find a job close to home. And I was still leaning on the Toyota because it was California. And then when my mom told me that, I was like, I got to take this GM job. Got to be close to home, be near my mom. And so I took the GM job instead of the Toyota job. So that's kind of my story back then. But I'll piggyback on some of the things you said. 20 years, that basically, because for SAIC, it is what it is. But for GM, we're in China for China, and the United States is the United States. They kind of keep it separate because I don't know if they want media to combine the two and talk about it from a global perspective. But it does. It really kind of reiterates that commitment that GM has to the largest passenger vehicle market in the world. Okay. And the lessons they can take from it, as long as they're viable in other regions, the lessons they can take from the China market will make them more competitive in the rest of the world, in the United States, in North America, in Europe, if and when they decide they want to enter back in to Europe, in Latin America, because everywhere else they go, they're going to see a Chinese automaker. So they should really lean into their capabilities in China and learning more from their counterparts, whether they're the joint venture team or the expats that live in China for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And you and I know at least a handful of them currently working out of Shanghai. And GM's a global company, and this reflects that.
And just a few days earlier, there were a huge management shuffle among the SAIC motor subsidiaries, SAIC-GM, SAIC passenger vehicle. There was some movement. So I think people were anticipating that this extension was coming. But you and I talked about on the show that for the longest time, when are they going to sign the extension, if at all? And now we have this in the rear view mirror and all right, let's get to work.
We know that GM right-sized because they wrote down $5 billion from the China market. Basically, that joint venture just got smaller. The one thing that I also want to just point out is that they want to continue to use China as an export hub, not to North America, but to Latin America, to Europe, to other parts of the world. So that's another reason why this joint venture is so important, because SAIC is not going to have access to those markets, not with their current brands. MG is pretty popular in certain parts of Europe and the UK, but it does okay in Mexico. But a Chevy has a long history in Latin America and South America, and it's a trusted brand. And these markets aren't China, where the consumers are pretty savvy and they're very, very focused on local brands. Because in Mexico, there's not really that many local domestic brands. In Brazil, not many local brands. So it's the foreign brands that really resonate amongst those consumers.
So a few nuggets is SAIC-GM still plans to launch 30 NEVs by the end of 2030. That's number one. And then the export part of it is they're going to start exporting the Electra E7 and some of the markets you mentioned, South America, Middle East, Africa, those regions. And the presser said markets beyond the US, or at least the official word from GM China on Chevrolet remaining production in the Chinese market for export to other markets, but no longer sold in the Chinese market. So it's kind of half done, half not done, but there's still going to... Remember, it's a capacity. That's the same thing everybody else is facing. What do you do with that capacity? And there we have some answers.
And here's a kind of microcosm of the world we live in. Australia right now, the top 10 EVs are all Chinese, or they're built in China, because the Tesla Model Y is one of the top 10. And I think the 3 also is in the top 10 for Australia. Now, Australia is an import-only market because they don't build any of their vehicles. GM closed their factories years ago in Australia, but this is the threat that if there isn't a domestic manufacturing footprint from legacy automakers, it's clear who the consumers prefer, okay? And this is despite XPeng, this is despite Zeekr kind of tripping over themselves as they entered the Australian market. I think they've figured things out over the last 18, 20 months, but BYD is the dominating brand, or more dominant brand. And a friend of mine, you met him before, who used to work at WM Motor, he moved back to Australia and he drives a BYD now. So that should tell you that, and he's not Chinese, he's a white guy from Melbourne.
So speaking of WM Motor, that resurrection is going nowhere. Side nugget. But no, I mean, remember, it is SAIC
Which is probably
Motor.
a good thing.
So SAIC Motor, remember the historical significance is, first, they're from Shanghai. And second, they're the largest automaker. They re-grabbed that number one automaker from BYD. And they have 2 of the top global automakers as partners, Volkswagen and GM. So from that perspective, it's difficult to, just like Tesla, we talk about Tesla, are you willing to just let go of the footprint? It's awfully hard to do, and you got to fight.
I see, in Shanghai even, their vehicles, the MGs, they're fleet vehicles. They're not, people don't buy them as private passenger vehicles. In the UK, people buy them as personal vehicles, but SAIC brands in Shanghai are mostly fleet vehicles, like DD vehicles and stuff like that. So SAIC's own brands have limited appeal in China.
And if you remember at the 2024 Beijing Auto Show, Mary Barrow, I think that was the last time that she was in China. And she was just wandering around the halls with Mark Royce. I don't think a lot of people knew who she was.
I bumped into her. Well,
I know you were doing the CNBC
on purpose. And then, Eunice Yoon tried to ask her a question on record, but she didn't want to be on camera. So
Yeah.
the one thing I did want to ask you, and let's move to this next topic, because one thing that we did not talk about is, and I've captured it in the newsletter this week. So for folks that want my perspective on it, and then we talked a little bit, Joe and I talked a little bit about it at the wheel, but the China market is suffering right now substantially. We're talking double digit. CPCA is talking about the market shrinking by 14%. What are your thoughts on that? Has that ever happened since 97, since you've been tracking it? What are what are you hearing in the background now that you're on the ground talking to people every day? Because what Joe pointed out in his newsletter is that 14% is like 3 million vehicles. Markets in the world. Okay. It's a little bit smaller than the India market, but we're talking, and I had mentioned that big reason why BMW is cutting staff by 8,000, big reason why Volkswagen is cutting staff by 50, wanting to cut by 100, Porsche's reducing staff. So tell us a little bit about if there's precedence for this and your thoughts. Like 14%, man.
Than the pandemic year of 2020? No, never. I can't recollect anything like this. And the latest little anecdote I can share is I visited this afternoon ZYT, which used to be DJI Auto, and Volkswagen is one of their biggest customers, and a lot of their products are on the Volkswagen kind of the plug-in ICE Pro models. And Volkswagen, this was like 4 years ago, told them they expect 2 to 3 million units of volume that never materialized because of the ICE drop. Think about that, right? As a supplier and how things can change in a moment. That's just one story. And if you look at the July numbers, one of the numbers was Chery's first time exporting 200,000 vehicles. 200,000 vehicles. China used to export 1 million vehicles a year for many years, and now one company exports 200,000 vehicles.
So I did a chart yesterday.
Yeah.
In 2019 or 2020, one of the two, they had exported almost 700,000 units. Last year, they exported 7 million. So within 5 years, they increased exports by 10x. And we are at a million unit run rate per month right now. So Chery is shipping 20% of that million units then.
I think the negative is obviously the economy, the consumption part of it. But I think the positive is, can we finally drive out the weak? Maybe it's about time. I don't know. There's too many brands. There's too many models.
There's going to be zombie companies. You and I know that. But the hope, I'm sure, from the central government is that these weaker players do lead.
Yeah. I've been testing out some system solutions on the advanced driver assistance. In that specific track, the competition is pretty diluted. ZYT is one example where the volume don't materialize. Momenta, if these luxury brands are not doing well, they're exposed.
I remember we talked about 3 or 4 years ago, I thought it was a coup that they were able to sign up the foreign automakers. But now, because of sales in China have fallen off a cliff for virtually every foreign partner that they've partnered with, it creates a difficult situation for Momenta, because Momenta is not going to be able to recruit Chinese domestic brands because each one of them either already has a partner or is using their own stack.
Well, Momenta is a big SAIC motor supplier. They're independent brands, right? GM, Buick, Cadillac, MG. They're rolling out their R7 model.
But their other JV partner, Volkswagen, is taking a different strategy. Volkswagen is also using Horizon. They're also working with XPeng. So it's a very disjointed strategy, in my opinion, for Volkswagen Group in China for intelligent driving.
And we've seen the last few days of Volkswagen push out these new models, ID Era 5X, Jetta's first EV, ID Unix 09. There's still more launching in the second half. How would they do? We'll know in about 6 months.
Here's kind of the irony with those launches, Lei. And let's pull in the Fathom. because you had mentioned it earlier in the podcast, these vehicles that they're launching today should have been launched 3 or 4 years ago when the ID3, the ID4 were launched, because these vehicles are kind of sort of competitive today, but they would have been pretty competitive 3 or 4 years ago. So that's the lag that we're seeing from the standpoint of the Chinese players continue to exponentially increase features and innovation, while the legacy automakers still seem to be very linear. Every 12, 14 months, we're going to improve. Every 12 and 14 months, we're going to improve. And that's just the bridge is the partnerships that help them accelerate adding some features. But at the end of the day, unless they can get out in front of the innovation cycle, it's just going to be a dog chasing its tail, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's uphill battle from here now on. But at least, like, we go back to SAIC-GM, the Electra brand has some momentum for now. But how long does that...
I don't know what you thought, and we might have talked about this months ago, but when I was at the show, I really liked the Wuling, that large SUV for $20,000. Yeah. There was a Wuling that was super nice. The smaller version they're going to try to export as a Chevy, but I really like the Wuling. I like the Electra. It's not a Buick in the sense that traditional Americans would think, okay, this is semi-premium, because it's not. Buick is not a premium brand in China. They're pricing it as not a premium brand. So it's definitely more, let's just say they're positioning it a little bit above the BYD brand in the China market. But I liked it. I liked it a lot better than what I saw from Buick and Wuling years ago, for sure.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about GM, the historical perspective is SAIC-GM, and then 5 years later, in 2002, official establishment of SAIC-GM Wuling. And then in the very early days, the Patek. I think these strategies in that early part will hopefully pay off going forward, because GM
Let me stop you there, Lei.
Of these joint
Finish
ventures.
your thought, but
right?
Can you explain to everyone all the joint ventures that GM has with SAIC? Because there's the Patek, but I want to make sure everyone understands. GM has international operations, and then jump off from there. GM has international operations in Shanghai. There's also an SGM, but please explain that to everyone.
So SGM and Patek, one is the vehicle manufacturing joint venture. The Patek is kind of like the VCTC of Volkswagen Group nowadays. So in the very early days, they set up this tech joint venture for local development. So that's one of the OGs that other foreign automakers did not do. And then the SAIC-GM Wuling, which people know them probably more for the Wuling Honghua Mini EV during the pandemic, which totally changed that segment, the small A00 segment. 100% completely electrified. And to this day, now they're exporting a lot of their models badged as Chevrolets, but really Chinese products into Southeast Asia.
To compete against BYD, to compete against Geely, to compete against Chery.
It's unique. So GM, the strategy is unique in China. But going back to where you are, Detroit, I'm certain that people look at this with a different feel maybe, but it's what GM needs to do.
So I was on the embargo list for the whole Fathom thing. So I'd kind of known about it earlier this week. And then CNEV Post had written an article about the Electra E7. And I'm in a group chat with a few of our friends, some old journalists. And I said, do you buy the Fathom or do you buy the E7? And he was like, and one of them was like,
yeah.
This is a stupid question because I can't buy the Buick in the U.S.
Let's talk about Fathom quickly.
Okay.
Do you think that's a statement-making announcement because the way it's priced at $28,350? Is that like, hey, the Chinese, take that? Do you think that's up to that? But at the same time, it's CATL inside, correct?
I had a chance to speak to Brianna Noble from the Detroit News because she wanted my instant reaction. And it wasn't an instant reaction because I'd kind of known about it. So I'd kind of marinated in my mind a little bit. When I hear Fathom, when I read Fathom, when I say Fathom, I'm thinking very dynamic, very edgy. That kind of sets the table for you. We haven't seen the vehicle, obviously, but there's a lot of bullet points from a feature standpoint. Blue Cruise, capability, all these things going on. And we also know that Jim Farley and Bill Ford over the last few weeks have both openly stated that we have to be able to compete toe-to-toe with the Chinese. Mm-hmm. Do I believe that the Fathom gets them there? I don't. But if it gets them 80% of the way there, they're better off than everybody else, okay? Because GM, they have the Equinox and they have the Blazer. They're going to be launching more clean energy vehicles. But if Bill Ford and Jim Farley are both openly stating to media that we need to be able to compete, that implies to me that they understand the stakes. They understand the quality levels, the innovation levels coming from the Chinese. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's not like they're talking from uninformed viewpoint. Jim Farley's was driving a SU-7 for 6 months.
Right, exactly. I was talking about that. He, being a Xiaomi fan, he understands, and they need to be realistic. And this is one of the things, being realistic and say, this is what we're doing, which I really like. Instead of saying all the other stuff about spying, about just do what you have to do and worry
make better products that are affordable.
Exactly. But I don't really like the name. It's hard to pronounce, even for me, but that's what it is.
The jury's still out for me for a truck to be called the Fathom, but I didn't think they should have called it one of their heritage names, because a lot of people were saying Ranchero and stuff. I was like, no, because the slate, and absent Chinese vehicles in the United States, it's going right after slate market, okay? Mm-hmm. Because it's $28,000, feature rich. And so if you're a slate owner, you better really, really love the analog life, because I can buy a fully featured Fathom for probably $5,000 more. The other thing too is that when we think of Ford's strategy and GM's strategy, EV, when everybody was really optimistic about the space, Ford individually changed vehicles. They built a Mach-E. They built an F-150 Lightning. They didn't create a platform. GM created a platform, the Ultium platform, and then they put a bunch of top hats on it. But they screwed up execution of the Ultium platform, and now they've abandoned it. So to me, GM had the right strategy. Let's focus on the platform and build vehicles off of that single platform. So now Ford is doing that with this UEV. It's a platform that they can quickly iterate top hats. I hope they can quickly iterate top hats. And I think that is a win for Ford.
Yeah, and also just do what you do best, which is trucks, and come out with these affordable, somewhat smart electric trucks. That's the market that the U.S. owns. The Chinese will probably not go there. So just focus on that part and maybe you'll be fine.
I think that the lesson that I take from Toyota with the Tacoma, Nissan with the Titan, is that they will enter that market. They just won't be super successful. Small truck, I'm talking Maverick, I'm talking Slate, I'm talking this UEV, they could make waves. Geely has Radar, BYD has the Shark, and they're not great trucks by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they could find success in the small truck market, the Chinese, eventually in North America and the US, the large truck. But GM and Ford need to be more than a one-trick pony. It can't be just, I build great trucks, everything else is kind of crap, if they're going to continue to be global players. So
that's next
Let
year,
me ask you, Lei, what have you been driving? What are your thoughts on that?
So most recent drives for the Envoy L60. And disclaimer, so these drives, I'm not getting paid for saying anything, but just for my own understanding and to share, especially me being a Tesla stan now, how these systems in China compare to FSD. And the three I've tried, the XPeng GX, Audi E7X, and most recently the Envoy L60. I actually believe the Envoy L60 with the new world model performs the best. And one of the reasons it does is 2 nights ago, I went through this Hutong challenge and it was successful. On the way back, I tried the navigated power swapping, which means it'll automatically route you there on the ADAS mode, park there automatically, back in, and then go out after it's done. Almost like what you can do with FSD. Superb. And it's not the old Neo would try with Will's car, remember? 2 years ago in Changzhou. I tweeted that it's leaps and bounds, and I'm not overstating it. You can put NIO now into the first camp. That's how good they've caught up. It's incredible.
For those people wondering, if you watch old school kung fu movies and there's these narrow passageways where people are walking and there's walls, there's large, almost like open courtyard apartments where the middle would be very open in a shared space, but each corner has an apartment for a family. And these small, narrow passageways, people drive cars through. And it's super narrow. People are walking, people are riding their bikes. So to use level 2+, that navigates you through a hutong without making a mistake or feeling like you need to intervene on something is pretty impressive.
An interesting feature in the Chinese market is very unique. It's called the human-machine co-driving. It's where if you feel like the system is not good enough, you tweak the steering wheel a little bit to help it, but the system is still on. Like, whereas FSD, if you touch it, it's disengagement. So this feature is actually on a lot of these solutions, which I think is very unique to the Chinese market. So it gives you now a different perspective of how I mentioned at the top of the show that how cutthroat that particular ADAS race is. Everybody pushing out new OTAs in the coming weeks.
With the market that the CPCA, I'm talking, the CPCA is the official voice of the Chinese auto industry. With them saying the market is going to shrink 14% through the end of this year, those companies are going to lean more heavily into why my intelligent driving is different, why mine is better, why mine is safer, why mine is more convenient. So in the absence of being able to cut price, they're going to have to position themselves a little bit differently in the market, or else they're going to get drowned out. And I think intelligent driving is one of those ways they'll do that.
Yeah, and then you compare these different vehicles, the handling are different, the vehicle size is different, how the OEMs work with the solution providers in offering the type of ADAS feel is different. Some are more aggressive, some are more conservative, but most of them are very capable of urban scenarios. That's how you can't really tell too much of a difference. Whereas in the US, FSD is the only one. There's no other. Speaking of NIO, congratulations to NIO on getting to 4,000 and the first fifth generation power swap stations. It's finally complete. All three of their brands can now swap, finally for Firefly, and then also 120 million swaps reached yesterday, or earlier this morning, actually. Big milestone, finally.
One thing that I did want to focus on as well, Lei, is that BYD launched a vehicle in Brazil that you can pick as a BEV, a PHEV, one that runs on gasoline, and then ones that runs on ethanol, okay? It's locally produced. Yeah. It is a game changer because for folks that aren't familiar with the South American market, sugarcane is very, very abundant in South America, Brazil specifically. So their alternate fuel or their clean fuel is ethanol. And ethanol in the U.S. is made from corn. In Brazil, in South America, it's made from sugarcane. And so they had a press release that said that this was jointly developed by the Brazilian R&D team and the Shenzhen R&D team. It's an affordable vehicle, 50% currently sourced locally in Brazil. And so people are concerned in the past about, well, they're just going to import Chinese parts and then they're going to build and it's just going to be assembly. But no, they're doing what they said they're going to do. They're going to locally source and they're producing, because initially that factory was building CKDs or knockdown kits, but now it's complete manufacturing. They're likely importing the batteries from Shenzhen, but again, 50% sourced locally. And, you know, this whole locally sourcing, Tesla is 90% locally sourced in China. Sure. Okay. So that's the virtue of building locally, like assembling, not knockdown kits, but assembling locally.
So speaking of BYD, they're about to reveal their Fangchongbao Tai 9, which is the BYD versions of the Range Rover. And then speaking
of Freelander has started production, I think.
Freelander started production, you know. The other extreme, the Maxtro V800, 680, over $100,000 launching, revealing yesterday. there's been this viral story of the bamboo cicada, which is related to
explain to them a little bit about what's going on with that.
This is a story about Big Mouth Richard Yu Chengdong, which is their Huawei's Richard Yu, BU, a couple of years ago when he said, this is the best vehicle under 10 million RMB. And there's like, wow, a crowd. And this cicada voice was so close to that, wow. Everybody made viral videos of it. And then Huawei had to take those down, some of those down. And then people just created different ways to show that sound. It became viral, the bamboo cicada.
The one thing I did want to highlight is this week's newsletter. I gave a little shout out to Elliot Richards for Everything Electric because he did a short review of a Bronco EV. And I wanted to tease Western audiences that, or at least North American audiences that, yes, there is a clean energy version of a Bronco. And no, you cannot have it. So for those Americans that want to see a BEV Bronco, this week's newsletter has a link to that YouTube review. But anyways, I'm sure you're ready because your daughter is likely, 2 or 3 weeks away from starting school again?
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, after Labor Day. Oh, it's late this year. Labor Day is late this year. So
my sons start in 3 weeks.
Yeah. But just quickly, some numbers to note. So I talked about July sales came out, right? The Leapmotor joining the 100,000 club. Boom. It was just a matter of time. And their A10, the small A0 vehicle, A10 has already produced 100,000 units in a matter of months. I think A10 was launched earlier this year, and it's already 100,000 units. Tesla.
Well, we should also note that the Xiaomi Sky Nomad has 100,000 orders.
Yeah. Tesla remaining resilient. Model Y was close to 40,000 units. They haven't done anything. It's still so powered.
Well, they've offered 6 and 7 years of financing.
Yeah.
So it's free money that they're offering.
Yeah.
And you say resilient, but also remember, this is on the backdrop of a 14% reduction in sales in 2026. So 40,000 units is actually pretty significant and much more resilient when you take that into consideration.
And we'll see what happens with the FSD approval. Currently, there's nothing that we can see that says it's coming. But more and more domestic local solutions now have the capability where you put in your navigation, you just press the button and it goes. Like FSD and all the way to the end to park. And on top of that, just last remaining item is this mandatory level 3, level 4 autonomous vehicle safety rules, which is the foundation, the framework that everybody has to meet. It's like a life cycle thing. So Tesla has to adhere to that. At the same time, Tesla has its own problem of getting approval because of the data issue. So I think it's very important. And we're going to see level 3, it looks like, next year being approved.
And then a reminder to everyone that GM and Ford in the United States has announced that they launched level 3 in 28. So
right. So yeah.
We have one comment, Lei. NIO not having, this is from SSJJ, NIO not having any more new models this year is kind of troublesome in terms of meeting an annual goal.
Well, the annual goal, I don't care about their volume. I think the annual goal is making a profit.
Profitability.
And if you look at the delivery to Yao Ming, he ordered on the night of the launch. This is 2 months later. He just got his ES9, which kind of tells you about the order intake. And this is going to be huge. The ES8 and ES9, I believe, will carry NIO the rest of the way in terms of making that profit for the year, despite not having any new products. And now there's a 5th generation swap station coming online. It's a plus that all 3 brands can now swap. And plus this update world model is, I hope that can inject some additional momentum. But I'm not too worried about no new products for this year. I think they're preparing for the NT 3.0 for the ES6, the 556 models next year.
It's going to be brutal race to the end of the year. And you and I should make sure we keep a close eye on rumors we hear about companies that are kind of falling apart. See, to your point about weaker players need to leave the market. I haven't heard anything yet, but we are still in summer, so likely not making any drastic moves. But
we look at the rankings. I think now a minimum is 30,000. And Li Auto is one of the ones that are kind of afloat at the 30,000. Where Li Auto was a year ago, 2 years ago, compared to where NIO was, XPeng was, things can change.
Yeah, and there's another FT article that talks about excess capacity in Europe and how the Chinese are looking at taking on some of that excess capacity rather than building new factories. And they point to Stellantis with Fiat factory in Italy. And so there's excess capacity and obviously overcapacity in China. And with demand slowing so much, there's going to be very, very underutilized factories in China throughout the rest of this year, probably. So we'll monitor that more closely. But up until now, I haven't heard any rumors about any drastic moves or desperate companies. So
we're good.
All right, everyone. Have fun tomorrow, man. And then we will see you back in the U.S. next week, buddy.
I can't believe this moved so fast. There's a few more items before I leave that I will try out. Try to maximize and scramble at the last minute because you want to use this opportunity being here to get a first-hand feel. Yeah. So, but
everyone,
yep.
Thanks for joining us as always. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We'll talk to you all next week.
Yep, next week and on the state side.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China EVs and more.